we've got essentially a decision to make as a group, and our decision is not the decision for the school district. Our decision is what is our recommendation, right? We're going to go through all this work, and we're going to come to some type of recommendation. And as I listened to all of you last week, well, it wasn't last week, it's probably been nearly a month, a while ago, when I listened to you, what I tried to listen to is what are some of the things that you seem to be caring about and saying, what would make a good decision? If we made a good decision, what were some things that would be some guiding principles of the work that we've looked at so far? We likely might add to this list. So I first want to just check in with all of you and to say, is this making sense of things that would tell us we're making a good decision? So we learned from some of the research out there. We had a little bit for and a little bit against, and not real decided with the research. But overall, one thing we did hear is, as much as possible, if we maintain an as equivalent as possible instructional hours for learning, at least we wouldn't see a deficit, right? Or hopefully we wouldn't. And there wasn't a lot out there, but so there's one. Something else, that we heard from principals and teachers anyway, is maintaining as equivalent as possible professional learning for staff. We know that if the most important thing in a child's life for learning is an effective educator, and so we also know that we need to support our educators in becoming increasingly more effective, and especially in a day and age when we've got a lot of novice teachers and teachers now entering the profession without traditional credentialing that we've used to have more of that traditional in the past. When we were thinking about, and I just put Fridays up here because we really haven't come to that conclusion yet, but when we think about taking a day off for professional development, an idea that we would try to avoid having our teachers come back every Friday, because that would kind of detract from the purpose of being able to recruit and retain people by having some flexibility for their time. So how could we bundle those hours together into a longer period of time so people aren't coming in just for a partial day or coming in every single week on that time? So does that seem like something to be a reasonable guiding principle? Okay. And then another one is, for the consideration for recruitment and retention of staff is how could we make some of that work time more flexible? So whether they are, teachers might be doing some work like report card preparation, but it doesn't mean they have to be doing it from the school classroom or the school library. They could be doing it from anywhere at all, at any time. And how could we increase some of that flexibility? So those were just some things that I heard in conversations as early start. Does anybody have a question about some of this, or would suggest maybe something different than what's up here so far? Okay. So certainly the other things we're going to start adding to this that we haven't really talked about with our topics so far are how does that work with parent schedules, right? That if parents could find that conducive with their childcare or their work needs. So that might be another guiding principle we're going to add later. Another guiding principle we might add later when we talk about support staff is how do we kind of equalize so we don't harm them with their compensation or their benefits. That might be a consideration that we add on to our list for guiding principles. But here's just a start. So let me know, and again, I'm just going to pause and just let you think about that for a minute. From questions or ideas, anything else you would add so far? Okay. You show me with a thumbs up that you think we're on the right track with a start to our guiding principles. I'm still not sure about that, or I don't think that's even close yet. Can you just show me around the room? Okay. All right, good. All right. All right, so we'll come back to that. One of the topics we're going to talk about, I'm going to revisit from last time, was instructional time. One of the last things we asked you to do was to talk in small groups, and each of your groups came up with about how many hours you thought would be the right amount of time based on our instructional time. And we had some range from 7 all the way up to, I think, There was one person that had said even up to 8.5 hours had seen that be successful at a charter school. So that was quite a range. And we had done some modeling around 7.5 hours and 8 hours, just as examples only. So one of the goals for today is for us to see if we can decide whether we are going to continue to model things in 2 different hour increments, or is it starting to make sense to narrow it down to one suggested model for how many hours would the school day be? Okay, so we'll be considering that today. All right, so I want to revisit the 5-day schedule, this slide we saw before, and then you can see that our district currently this year provides 1,134 hours of instruction per school year, and then you can see to the left the requirements. So we are substantially above what the minimum requirement is. I would not say, well, let's rest our hats on that, we can lower it way down again, because we all know that the instructional time is definitely related to students' ability to learn. Okay, so we're not looking to try to come down to the minimum standard. We just want you to see that comparison. All right, this 7.5 hour day schedule, when we showed it to you last time, we showed you at 1,078 hours. And when I looked at it again, with the idea that we don't have early releases on a Monday through Thursday schedule, and so if we took out, say the day before Christmas, the day before, sorry, not before Christmas, before winter break, or the day before the last day of school, both of those are on Thursdays. A Friday is off before the weekend, so you take those back and you rethink about parent-teacher conferences, then you have 1,102 days. So that would be, this is modeling what it would be without those early release days.
Dr. Schuff, may I pause? If you're following along on the PowerPoint and you think you're looking at last week's PowerPoint, you're correct, but keep going to slide 26.
31 now.
Now we're on 31. And this is a continuation. I just wanted to make sure some people were trying to track. Is everybody with us? Okay.
Okay, very good. All right, so just looking at instructional minutes, the other thing we started to think about was Monday through Thursday, you have in a regular 7-hour school day, approximately 5 minutes for morning announcements and attendance, 40 minutes for lunch and recess daily, and if you are in the lower grades, 15-minute recess, or if you're in the middle school grades, you also have passing time between classes. That is all time that is included in the instructional hours for Arizona Department of Education. When we report our instructional hours, we report from start bell, to ending bell. But what we know about usable instructional time, we know that those minutes aren't really for content instruction or skill development for kids. Okay, so if you think about that then, on Fridays, assuming the Fridays are off, or we'll call it Mondays or Fridays, one day is off per week, then out of those instructional hours, about 1 hour a day would have been unusable time. So if you kind of follow my thinking, 1 hour a day for the 1 day a week off, times 36 weeks in the school year, is really essentially taking off 36 from that total. So here's what that might look like. Remember, we had on a 5-day schedule 1,134 days, and out of that 1,134 days, 36 of those aren't really usable time on the 1 day off. So if I add that back to our 1,102 that we have with our 4-day schedule, then really we come out 4 hours ahead. Technically, it really is red to red. The technical hour difference is red to red. The usable instructional time is really the white to the red. Okay? So just stop, because that was a lot of just kind of a little complexity. Just have a chat with the person next to you And you can flip back on the slide yourself to those things. Have a chat with the person next to you, because we're going to really start to talk about, by the end of the day today, what we're thinking around a 7.5 or 8 hour model to be considering. Okay, so just see if you can explain what I just explained, see if you can explain that to the person next to you, and that will tell you if it makes sense. All right, looking back up here, questions or comments of what you're thinking about, worrying about, wondering about? I know you guys are not going to like coming up here, but they're really asking me to try it this way. Erica's going to do some running.
Was she? Is it no?
It is.
Oh, God, it doesn't sound like. Anyway, we have a parent at our table, and her big question is about instructional minutes and reflecting on specials like allowing PE and so on and so forth. I think I answered her question, but I think maybe to clarify, that is included in our day, our instructional minutes, and we would not lose it. Oh, so she was not all the way through when we were talking, so I'm turning it over to her.
Do you see an impact on behavior with that amount of instructional time every day, not allowing for more than an hour of break time for the students?
I think that is an excellent question, and that's one of the things that, kind of charging all of you to also help us to go back for. We weren't really finding a lot of research out there on as much about behaviors, social emotional learning. Mrs. Camp, you did find one study. You can speak to that that talked about some of the behaviors, I believe.
Sure. So one of the studies that I found said that there was actually an increase in bullying, off-task behavior, and also crime. But that was because of the day that the children were not in school. And it seemed to me like there was more research around middle school age children than elementary age children. So there was also, and I can't off the top of my head spit this out, but there was also a positive of feeling of more connectedness with the school, and then also having a greater break and feeling more refreshed when they're coming back the next week. So having that long weekend and feeling refreshed for school.
But I mean more, I know what you mean there, but I mean more within the actual classroom, because children, especially in the elementary age, struggle to concentrate for more than 15 to 20 minutes at a time. So is there excess movement time within each class period if they're going to be at school for such a long day?
I would say that's something we definitely need to look into. And so you're really speaking about children's stamina, right?
Yes.
How long can they handle reading or math or science for a given time? Our teachers even currently do brain breaks. And so that would be something that we would want to put a little bit more time and effort into looking at. That doesn't necessarily mean extending recess times, because recess times are non-instructional. And so that's going the opposite direction, right, of what we're looking for. We want to ensure they have at least the amount of instructional time that we currently have, if not slightly more. Research says that's the best. However, for stamina of children, yes, we need to be thinking about brain breaks and how do we make learning more active and engaging, and using total physical response of children getting up and moving and being interactive as they're learning.
That was my concern, was, yeah, activity within the classroom, not necessarily more breaks throughout the day.
We would say that's best practice now, regardless of a 4-day or 5-day week. And what I think we'll make sure we get into the notes today is the idea of stamina and activity within the classroom and engagement strategies to make sure we're reinforcing those with teachers, kind of regardless of whether we do this or not.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Great comments. Okay, so this was again modeled at a 7.5-hour day, and remember the other one we were considering was 8-hour day. When you all gave us your feedback, I'd say most of you were kind of at that 7.5-hour mark. We did have some on bookending on other ends, but we're gonna just keep thinking about that with the lens of the other things we're gonna talk about today. So this next question I have for you is, essentially, does a 7.5-hour day provide sufficient instructional time? Other than time, what else should be considered for academic and social needs? I think you gave us a great start to that conversation. Take a couple more minutes at your table, and then I'm going to ask for some comments, and Natasha is going to write those down for you, okay? So is there anything else we should be considering? Because we're still kind of in that frame of instruction. All right, kind of close out your thought. I'd like a couple of you to either come to the mics or wave your hand at Erica, and let's get some other ideas we need to make sure we record and be thinking about, planning for.
Hello, Mrs. Camp.
It's on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We were saying one of the things that we would need is beyond just the minutes, how will we ensure that teachers are supported so that we are using those minutes appropriately, including the time for building and physical movement, but also with an extended day, how do we actually maximize those minutes instructionally?
Great. Kind of our urgency for our use of time.
Right, we don't want to waste that time, so how will teachers be supported?
We're not watching a 3-hour movie on Thursday afternoons?
Definitely not.
No, okay. Any other things?
Sorry. I know that budgeting is a major problem, and I have my own comments outside of this room to do with that, but how are teachers getting enough breaks? If you don't have enough teachers in the classroom and enough support staff, how are teachers being allowed to provide our children with the education they need if they're not getting the support they need? Do they get to have a break?
So we will be showing you some schedules today. Kind of a sample of how does that change a master schedule. Right now, teachers get a break at lunch. They get at least a 30-minute duty-free lunch. And if they're not, they need to raise their hand and tell somebody they're not. And then they also get a prep period. Right now, because of budget, it's a 35-minute budget. Whether we pass the override or not would tell us whether we can increase that time for a longer preparation period, longer time for students in art, music, and PE, which is a different kind of learning that is often very active for them also. So we'll show you some schedules later today. Anything else you'd like us to be thinking about, planning for? So we can always come back to it, so if you think of something later. Okay? All right, so the next topic is we're going to look at is professional development. And Natasha's going to go through some information, and then we'll let you ask a lot of questions and engage in a different way.
Can everybody hear me okay? All right, so professional development. We know that teachers need professional development to stay current with educational practices, as well as, like Dr. Shuff was saying, we have quite a few new teachers to our profession that have not received some of the most appropriate training that we would hope for. So in looking at professional development, one of the things we wanted to really take into consideration first and foremost was the amount of time that our certificated staff was spending in a school day. Now, if you are a teacher or you are an administrator, you're not going to laugh at this, but this is the best I could do mathematically. So on the right-hand side, I tried to model for you, I just want to make sure you can see, Chris. I tried to model for you the teacher's day in a 7.5-hour day, and then also the teacher's day in an 8-hour day. And the formula that I used here was at least 45 minutes. So we know that teachers arrive on campus prior to children being there for duties, and then they also stay after for their afternoon duty, and I only counted that time. So when you are saying, if you're a teacher in the room and you're like, oh my gracious, I stayed more than 45 minutes, that was the minimum requirement that we were looking for as we modeled here. And then we also needed to look at our principals. So our principals or our administrators are on this side, and we modeled them at, would that be an hour, 2 hours, I think, 2 hours and 15 minutes additional.
No.
So, nope.
An hour 45.
Hour 45. So they are usually staying longer than our teachers, or they're there for the after-school events of sports and things like that. So this is just a mock-up of a typical day spent at school. And what I was essentially trying to find here is how much time do we have left over for professional development. So I'm going to do a little bit of a quiz by having you look up at the slides. On a 7.5-hour day, 4 days a week, total number of hours teachers would spend teaching plus their 45 minutes, what would that equal? 33. So right over here, and I don't think I have a pointer on here, but do you see where it says 33? So that's the 4 days, right? 4 days, 33 hours. That means that we have an additional available time for professional development per week of 7 hours to get us to a 40-hour week, right? We work 40 hours, we're a full-time employee. You with me? Okay. How many hours would you be working if it was an 8-hour day for 4 days? 35. And how many more hours would you have left for professional development that week? 5 hours. Okay, so you get this mathematically, right? Okay, that's fine and dandy. And available time for PD bi-weekly, 14 and 10, right? Does my math work? All right. Except we have to have people to deliver the professional development, right? So your administrators are delivering professional development, so we needed to also look at their hours per week. And they're going to laugh at this too, because if I say that they work a 40-hour week, they're going to think that's hilarious, right? But mathematically, when we look at it at a 7.5-hour day in a four-day week, how many hours would they be working in those 4 days? 37. And they would have additionally 3 hours of PD time per week, or if we did it bi-weekly, 6 hours. So, in thinking about that, we really wanted to model it around the 6 hours that were available for our administrators to be with our teachers, providing professional development. So I'm going to show you a comparison of what that looks like. I'm not showing you a comparison. I'm showing you a calendar of what that looks like if we were to put it into practice. So when Dr. Schuff and I were going through this with our team, we were thinking, 6 hours, okay, so does that mean that every week teachers would come in for professional development in like 2-hour segments? Does that make sense? I don't know if that really makes sense, traveling all the way in and then staying for 2 hours and then traveling all the way back. So we modeled it in this way. We modeled it by saying, on a professional development dedicated day, which is a blue day, is that right? Pink day. Oh, I was just checking to see if you were awake. Okay, on a professional development day, which is a pink day, we would be having district PD and site PD combined for a total of 6 hours. However, the actual hours of PD would be 5 because you also need a lunch and potential travel time, right? So the way we have modeled it here is, in this calendar, is 16 days would be dedicated to professional development. 18 days would be dedicated to teacher-directed days. Those are the blue days. The blue days being teacher-directed means you as a teacher are doing things like planning, getting your report cards ready, getting your progress reports done, assessing maybe some data analysis. And that would be a flexible day that you wouldn't necessarily be reporting to your campus. You could do that from anywhere. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to just breathe that in real quick. You do have access to this calendar. I want you just to take a look at it, and then I'm going to go on to the next slide. But I want to say something else about how strategic we were with placing these dates. You'll notice that what we tried to do in this calendar is anytime there was a holiday, like for example September 4th, we really tried to give a blue day on the Friday so that we could extend that weekend into really a 4-day weekend. Right? So we were thinking about, someone had said something about how do we recruit and retain staff, right? We really need to think strategically about that when we're building out the calendar. So I want you to take just a couple of seconds at your tables, process this. What do you think about potentially this model?
And this is a model of a schedule.
Definitely a model.
What would have to come out of this is, again, a calendar committee and people to really look at this more deeply. And this would be a staff perspective because parents would already have weighed in on the 4-day work model. After that, it's kind of a staff decision around how we utilize this time. So this is just showing you one way it could be modeled.
Okay, So, would anybody like to share something that you talked about or that resonated with you just in looking at the calendar?
So,
I talk loud enough, I think I can just say it.
Okay.
But as a parent, I just want to clarify my understanding. Am I hearing that the pink days for the teachers are additional hours above and beyond their 40-hour work week?
No, that would equate to getting them to their 40-hour work week.
That's the extra hours is on these particular pink Fridays.
Perfect. Yep.
I would add that actually the teachers don't get to 40 hours because we modeled it out off of the administrator available hours. So if every other week administrators had 6 hours, teachers had 14 hours. So you can see every other week there's actually an additional 8 hours that then becomes that flexible time. On their blue time is kind of some part of their 40-hour week, and part of that blue time is just flat out time off. And so there's a lot of choice there to treat them as professionals.
Go ahead, Connie.
So I was just wondering, were we assuming that teachers aren't going to do anything on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday except for teach? Because the way I was looking at it too was that there's no way that I can't have like planning time. I would have to have some planning time every day in order to be successful daily for my students. So, allowing for that. But then the second part being, I wasn't sure where the model came from. So I was just curious, is this something we were thinking, or is this something that was modeled at another district that's been doing something with PD?
we had more questions than we did than we kind of.
Sure. It's just a model. We did not take it from another district. We took an idea from another district, but we really tried to model it off of the certificated technical hours to give us, what would that look like to make sure that we're still meeting professional development hours for our teachers. And maybe this will be helpful. Let me just show you something really quickly. This is a comparison of what we currently have in professional development hours to what I have proposed for a 4-day model. So currently, we have site professional days, 19, district, 9, in-service days, you have 2 full in-service days. You have collaborative teams, which we modeled at 40 minutes every Wednesday, which is equivalent to 0.67, I believe. You have report card and prep time, 6 of those built into our professional development calendar currently. And you have, I didn't delineate teacher directed, right? But really teacher directed is your report card and prep. Because you are doing what you need to do that day to prepare. So our actual time in 5-day, taking out the 12 hours of teacher directed, actual PD time is 92 hours. In a 4-day, with 80 hours dedicated to the 16 site and district days, and then 18 teacher-directed days at 72 hours, I subtracted out the 72 from the 52 to give you 80. That's your comparison in a 5-day, how many hours of PD you currently have to how many hours of PD it would be able to provide in a 4-day week.
So
Slightly less.
So that purpose was to compare PD hours. But you may also be looking at what's the comparison of flexible time within the week. The flexible time shifted from 12 to 72, right? So that's 60 more hours of flexible time, within the 40 time.
And that's not in the week, that's in the year.
What's in the year? Yes, sorry.
So from 12 hours of flexible time to 72 hours. Other questions?
If this is to go ahead, are you just going to base it on like a guesswork model, or are you actually going to find out from the teachers how much work they actually do unpaid based on what they currently do rather than a guesswork frame? Because that doesn't look right to me. I know I'm not a teacher, but I know that teachers don't do 40 minutes a day of unpaid or unscheduled work.
So I would respond to that. Right now, all of our educators, administrators, teachers, we know they work long and hard. That's what it was about saying. Typically on the campus, what is the expectation for them to come to work by a certain time and leave by a certain time? Anything else beyond that is flexible. If they choose to do more or if they don't choose to do more, right? And depending on what's going on in their home and their life, they may do a whole lot less one week and a whole lot more the next week. But they flex that time. So if they're an early start school, most of the schools expect them to be there 15 minutes ahead of the day. And then they typically stay half an hour at the end of the day. Our late start schools do it just the opposite. They tend to start them half an hour before school starts and then stick around for 15 minutes of duties, and everybody can go home or they can continue working. So in no way is it meant to be disrespectful to our educators because we know how hard they work and how long they work. We just had to look at, if you want to compare what happens in a 5-day week, compared to a 4-day week, trying to look at that really from a standpoint also of trying to make sure we didn't model something that went too far, right? And have people come every Friday. That kind of defeats, it may achieve the purpose for parents who are interested in a 4-day week, but it doesn't achieve any purpose with staff. So to your point about how will we include, beyond even here in this committee, to surfacing the ideas and things to think about, if the governing board, if you all say we think it's the right thing to move forward, and the governing board were to approve that, then we have the next 4 to 6 months where we have to really work with staff to really put a real plan into place, right? So this was one way to model it. That's where our teacher advisory group will be coming together. That's where perhaps even a broader group than that, but the teacher advisory group will be going back to other teachers. We'd have to be working with our support staff advisory group, all of those people to come up with a final modeling of what some of these pieces would look like, which days, how many hours. But we wanted to at least start to say, we have to answer the question, we're going to talk about curriculum today, we're going to talk about assessment, we're going to talk about special ed. We have to say, what's the implication? What are some pros and cons? We have to at least be thinking about what would happen with professional development. One school district who did this shortchanged the professional development, and they are sadly saying that part really is the one thing that didn't work because they didn't think about that, they didn't plan for that, and it's hard to go back the other direction. So we're just putting up one way of thinking about it, trying to say, is it relatively close to what we have right now for professional development? It's relatively close. It's 12 hours of difference. Somebody could say that's a lot, but it's not disparate. It's not like it's completely lacking as a real negative to the model. Again, guiding principles, how can we make it as much as similar as possible so we aren't harming our system? But how are we also getting some benefits?
I actually appreciate the autonomy that is pushed by moving hours into the teacher directive. Even back on your other slide, 72 hours for me to lesson plan, grade, do what I need to do. Though as I look at this, I do hope that the 80-hour total up at the top with the site, I'm hoping that the collaborative team piece is still included within those pink days. Because, you know, we've had 2 collaborative team meetings for 4th, 5th, 6th grade mathematics since the start of school. And we have already started really discussing about, you know, the vertical alignment and how we utilize, you know, each step as we go. And I see how powerful that time is, just as powerfully as I see how important it is when we have everyone together, all the math teachers together doing professional development. So I do hope that we can somehow, though the hours are less, maintain at least some of that structure.
Can you hold on to that also, Allison? So when we get to a pros and cons slide, we can make sure that we notate that as an interest.
Right.
Because that is getting a little bit into the weeds. I think if this is the direction we go, a committee could drive that, right? What does that 6 hours look like?
So just for example, and Natasha said we kind of model this as if it was 5 hours, and then, you know, we essentially called all the lunches paid lunches. You know, maybe the business world, you take that hour is not on the clock type of thing. We included lunches as essentially part of the paid 40 hours every day. So we modeled travel time if needed to be able to go from, maybe we start out at the school sites and then you might go to the district. So if there was travel time and lunch built in there. But there's nothing there that says it's all 5 hours of the site, or it's 3 hours here and 2 hours there, or part of the 3 hours of the site also includes the 40 minutes, or maybe it's a whole hour of collaborative team time, which is also autonomous time for teachers, flexible, where you all are deciding what's the most important thing to focus on together in your collaboration, not necessarily professional development or training, but it's just your professional collaboration time to make decisions together and plan together and work out what's best. So that, in our intention, was a bucket that you all would have to come forward and say what's the best use of that time. And it's changed from year to year. 2 years ago, our teachers wanted lots more cross-district time. This past year in our surveys, we said we want more site time. So we've changed it over this year to be different. So I don't know that it would be same from year to year. It might be based on what the needs are and what people are feeling they need that best supports them.
We had a few different thoughts and different pots related to this. One was on the slide regarding the hours worked, feeling a little bit like not really understanding fully where those hours came from, that it didn't include actual, like this looks like the 7.5 and 8 hour model, which is actually student time. Correct? That would be student 7.5 hours, student 8 hours. So for most of us right now, that's a 7, but that definitely doesn't equate to the hours that we work with required duties. So to the question earlier, I think that it came up is there a way that if we really did need to look at those numbers, we could gather some actual data about real teacher hours worked, which yes, we all know we do. Obviously, if you know me, I love PD, so I don't want that to go away, especially because we need it, especially if ever changing a model. A concern that I have is that when we look at the reasons that both teachers, staff, and our community members as well said that they might be interested in a 4-day week, the presented pink and blue model really negates a lot of the things. So we're not saving as much if we still have people on campus and we are utilizing, you know, electricity, and we still have some of those overhead costs. It is also a financial difficulty for teachers then who will not be home with school-age children and may have to cover childcare on those days. We may also have community kickback of if you can afford to have your teachers in the classroom and have lights on and air conditioning running, why can't our kids be at school on those days? Mental health was an issue that came up, flexibility for scheduling things outside. So in my personal opinion, when we look at the pink and blue calendar, it does not match the majority of the reasons that our staff and community said they had an interest in a 4-day week.
Okay, so
That
we'll get some of those on the pros and cons. So are you ready to, do you have anything else before we do pros and cons with that?
I just want to make sure I didn't leave anybody out that wanted to speak. Okay. So what are the pros and cons of the professional development 4-day schedule? Wait, let me go back. And what are the pros and cons of the 7.5 hour versus the 8 hour? And if you want to facilitate that, I can type.
Sure. So why don't you guys take a little bit of tabletop time and see if we can surface some of those. And again, what was modeled here isn't necessarily how it would come out. It's just one way to demonstrate. I do think it's important, to Carrie's point, I do think it's important to recognize that a 4-day work week, I don't think it would be in our best interest to have it be where there were no professional development. I don't think there's a way that we can help grow in a healthy way in a school district without that. So it is a give and take. If it becomes a model that's a little bit less or a little bit more, you know, that's a negotiation and that's a consensus that a group, you know, a larger group of people will come to. That won't be a come down from me or Natasha on that. So talk about it with yourselves, because professional development is an implication. So if you think it doesn't work on a Friday, and we think it has to be during the work day while we're here, that may be something to think, I don't think 4-day work week works. Maybe we're really sticking with a 5-day if it really can't go that direction. So give yourself the room to have the full range of conversation of what that implications are for professional development. But I'm also looking for the 7.5-hour day versus the 8-hour day. You saw what the hours that were left, that were remaining. So remember that for teachers, every other week, essentially, there were 14 hours that could be flexible time or professional development time. For principals, it was 6. We modeled it after 6, which gave all the other hours more flexible time on the teacher side. They just end up giving you more flexible time. As soon as we went to an 8-hour day, there was 0 time left at all for professional development on that 5th day. So that's when we started to think about 7.5 versus 8-hour days, what can work. So please talk about the implications for 7.5 versus 8 from the perspective of professional development and any other pros and cons.
Okay, only because my husband said that I have to come home tonight, we should continue. So, pros and cons, but I am going to need you to come to the mic for this, because I only have one mic runner, and the rest of you need to just run yourselves to the mic. Amanda, go to the mic.
This makes you feel so important.
It's on.
Can you hear me? Okay, so we were talking about at our table, what I was kind of thinking about is, I think when everybody thinks about going to a 4-day work week, we think about like the private sector, like we just go to 10-hour days, right? And then we just take Friday off and we're good. And so I think when they first brought up the 4-day school week, I immediately worried about that, and I thought, oh my God, kids cannot be in school for that long. And then I thought, well, even if the teachers didn't want to come on Friday and we did all our professional development after school, 2 hours every day, they are there an hour before school, a lot of them, let's be realistic. And are you really going to feel like doing PD after school, answering emails, grading? I think you're exhausted, and I don't know that that would be productive time to stay a 10-hour day. So I think I had to adjust my thinking that schools just don't work like the traditional business model, and we can't just go, oh, we'll just work 10-hour days, 4 days a week, and take Friday off. I just don't think it's that simple if you think about what we can handle stamina-wise. And then, like you said, if we're doing PD till 5, when are we playing sports? When are we running clubs? How are, principals are working 14-hour days. Like, I just don't know that private sector model could work for schools.
What shall I write?
My shoes are driving me nuts.
So is that a con? Can't follow the private sector model? Okay, Dr. Shuff is not liking that, I can tell.
I'm just wrapping my head around it.
Go for it, I'm listening to you.
That's all right. So I think you had asked me to remind you of my pro, which would have been the autonomy bucket of hours is being given to us and entrusted to teachers. And I think that actually does follow up. And one of the things I was mentioning was we're professionals, and just like in the business sector, I'm sorry, when I was a manager for a really big place that does fulfillment, I worked more than 40 hours because as a manager, that's what you do. As an owner of a business, my dad put in 70 hours. There's plenty of professions that put in more than 40-hour work weeks. Teachers are professionals. We already know we work 50, 60 hours a week. That's how it works. It's called being a professional. So I guess the autonomy of knowing that the district, knowing that parents, knowing that the board is aware of the fact that I might choose to spend of my 72-hour bucket 2 hours a night on my grading and my lesson planning, that's how I spend it. But someone else may need to put their kids to bed.
All right, you have more ideas. Please stand in line at the mic so we can just get the ideas one after another.
Other pros and cons.
Every group should have somebody at the mic.
Our group talked about really liking the idea of being fresh for professional development, being able to do that in the morning instead of having to stay after a full day with the children.
And to add to that, our group thought that if we're fresh and ready for PD, most teachers would stay maybe the full day and get stuff ready that we learned, ready for next week to implement.
So just to build on the autonomy portion, I'm a parent in the district, but I work at a charter school that's been 4 days since its opening. And PD doesn't always last like 6-7 hours for the whole day. I was explaining to the parent that I was speaking with last week, we just kind of had a first week debriefing. And it was about 2 hours, you know, kind of the positives, negatives, what worked, what didn't work. And then we were able to go and work on what we needed to do. The teams were able to, I'm a special education teacher, the teams were able to break and go with their teams. I was able to do actually 6 hours paperwork, but this Friday, the general ed teachers have a 6-hour PD. I don't. I asked the principal, do I have to go? She said, it doesn't pertain to you. So there is a lot of flexibility, but the following week, the teachers aren't going to be in a 6-hour PD. It just happens to be that they're receiving training on something that's going to unfortunately take that long. So there really is a lot of autonomy, but there's also a lot of flexibility that I personally find. And so it's not always a set amount, you're going to do it for this long. And the teachers, you know, they can work in their team groups, they can work independently, and that's just my personal experience with it, that there's a lot more flexibility than you would actually think at the beginning. Kind of just seeing it on paper is a little bit different in practice, so.
Carrie, just make sure they get on the board.
So I was with the team that said that we like the freshness of having the whole day PD. But me and another teacher were just speaking, and we realized that we're moms too. We have our own children in sports after school, and we're both coaches. So to have that long 8-hour day and then on top of it doing the coaching and trying to get my own kids to their sports and things like that, I think that would just be so much and so heavy for me. So I just wanted to put that out there about that part.
So is it the same as a 7.5-hour day versus 8-hour
Correct.
day?
Correct.
Either one, you think that becomes too long?
I think even with the 7.5 hour, coaching last year, right now soccer, which is what I coach, girls soccer, is in November. It gets darker earlier. So with even the 7.5 hour, they're gonna be out there playing in the dark. So that means we're gonna have to put on electricity to light up the field, things like that. And some schools don't even have the electricity out in the field. So I'm thinking that would affect them either way. So I'm like torn. I'm on both sides. I like the 4-day week, but all these other things are like, life happens. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like torn between the two.
Thank you.
There are 2 mics. Well, there were.
Okay, so I think I'm repeating this for the purpose of getting it in the pros and cons section,
Yes.
correct? Okay, so pro, there's some greater autonomy and choice decision-making for teachers in this model. Con would be that it negates some of the interests of the community and teachers for flexibility with Fridays for mental health scheduling purposes, as well as cutting down on overhead costs if we are still housing ongoing PD every Friday on the campuses. I would also say a potential con is the availability and flexibility of the administrative staff that needs to be available to support the professional development going on, and with so much increase in autonomy and flexibility, how is that maintained, supported, everything, monitored, supplied, lots of those things.
So, Tasha, one of the things she said, it negates interest of reducing overhead costs, or, but also it was maybe the appeal or benefit of having 1 day off a week to staff?
Correct. I know that the staff and teachers specifically mentioned personal well-being, mental health, ability to schedule appointments and things for themselves and their children outside of that. And then also a con would be that this would be a potential increase in, or potential detriment financially to teachers who have students that they would need to cover childcare for on those Fridays of PD when their children would not actually be in school with them.
So teacher childcare costs.
So one of our goals is to attract and retain teachers, and so I feel like if I were comparing schedules, which I have, to 5 other districts in our state that have gone to the 4-day model, I wouldn't choose ours. So I think we would have to look at something different. I definitely agree about PD, and I think we need it, but what I'm saying is just something different. Most of the schools were either 1 4-hour or 1 8-hour per month structured PD, and then of course teachers, as we all know, that's, you know, your decisions from there about how much time you're spending. So if it was about attracting and retaining, that would be my thought there.
My potential con is really more of a concern, but I'm just a parent in the community, and my concern would be that if the teachers don't feel that they're getting the adequate support for their personal development, that they would seek employment elsewhere and that we would lose quality teachers. So my concern would be that if this is of high importance to our teachers, that it needs to be kept and watched and made sure that they got their appropriate hours. So that would be my con, is that somehow it could be skipped or looked over, but I don't really know the inner workings, but that's my.
So Tasha, maybe you could make a separate text box. I think her comment is, it's not necessarily a pro or a con for the 4-day, maybe it is a con for the 4-day PD schedule. If it's reduced professional development time, then they may not be getting the support they need to feel like they are being impactful with their profession.
Got it. I'm just going to do a time check. Okay. I'm going to keep going here because we have 15 minutes left together. And I have a couple more topics to cover. So you might be wondering, okay, so that was professional development. What does it look like on a 4-day week? What does our curriculum look like on a 4-day week? So one of the things that we looked at as an Ed Services team is we really looked at the current instructional days that we have per trimester, and then how many days each unit was paced, you know, or guided to be paced. Remember, that's flexible, right? For each of those units. And we used a ratio model of a percentage of the trimester. So if you're looking at the top row, I'm speaking to our 5-day model. The example is we have 61 instructional days in trimester 1, okay? Of those 61 instructional days, and this was 3rd grade, this was 4th grade, so we picked one grade level. This is 4th grade. Of those 61 instructional days, 34% of those instructional days were dedicated to Unit 1, 33% to Unit 2, 16% to Unit 3, 16.5% to Unit 4, okay? So we did the same thing with the dedicated instructional days of a 4-day week. Notice that we dropped from 61 instructional days to 47 instructional days. So if we were using a ratio model, we would take those units then and say, okay, then the dedicated amount of time to Unit 1 would drop from 21 days to 16 days, which would still remain at your 34%. You see the pattern that we continued with. That was our easiest way of looking at how could we really think about the pacing of our curriculum if we are actually decreasing the instructional days per trimester and actually days per year, but we still have the same amount of content to teach.
So with a half hour extra per day, you're thinking overall the 15 minutes would go to ELA and an additional 15 minutes to go to math every day, times 4, so you're getting an extra 2 hours per week in ELA and 2 hours in math to offset the number of days. So that's your conversation is, does it work without losing your ability to teach your curriculum for our kids?
Correct. I'm going to show you a sample schedule. So again, these are complete samples, right? Lots of factors that we don't yet know yet, like when does the school day start? When does the school day end? Do we put the minutes at the beginning? Do we put the minutes all at the end? So I'm just assuming I'm assuming that I sampled this at an 8-hour, I'm extending the day, and then a 7.5-hour, I'm just extending the day, okay? So I ran this in a 10-period day. For 8 hours, we are looking at 480 minutes in the day. And for 7.5 hours, you're looking at 450 minutes in the day. Anybody know what our minutes are right now in a day? 420. Who said 420? Good job. Okay, so when you model it this way, and we say each period, follow me on the 8-hour day, each period is going to be 48 minutes, right? That looks really nice on paper, but it doesn't really work that way, right? Because your lunch is actually 40 minutes, and then you have to figure out how many minutes for champs or specials. So I gave champs, you'll see an increase here, so to speak to what you were saying in the back, right? I gave champs 49 minutes and modeled a 40-minute lunch, and then each of the remainder of the periods are coming between 48 and 49 minutes. Do you see that? Okay. Notice that I added quite a few more minutes for our ELA time, and then quite a few more minutes for math. If you look at science, that's only 49 minutes, and then social studies would be 49 minutes. Obviously, that's going to also depend on exact campuses and the number of sections that you have, right? Here's what the 7.5-hour day looked like if I modeled it at a 45-minute period for 10 periods. Again, bumping up champs, because we do think that they will need some additional active time compared to the 35 minutes that we have right now if the override passes. If the override doesn't pass, I have to come back to this. So if the override passes, I'm proposing to dedicate more minutes to champs, which increases our teacher prep time. That could be a collaborative team of 45 minutes. Allison left me. She would have loved this. Darn it. And then, again, additional minutes for math and additional minutes for ELA. I'm going to keep going. Here's what a sample schedule for elementary might look like. So in a 5-day week, we have approximately 120 minutes for ELA, 80 minutes for math, UC science, social studies, champs, lunch, and then your 15-minute recess plus your 15-minute recess that's added at the lunch period. So on an 8-hour day, we could dedicate 150 minutes to ELA and 120 minutes to math, shorting your science and social studies, increasing your champs time, keeping your lunch, and your recess the same. That could be negotiable, especially for our primary teachers. I know that our kindergarten babies cannot be in ELA for 150 minutes straight. Come on, grow up. So obviously that could be chunked, right, throughout the day. And then usually you all do that right now, you chunk it, right? And then so your 7.5-hour day might look like this, dedicating those instructional minutes to those subjects as delineated in the far right-hand column. Again, this is just a sample. Assessment, let me just talk really quickly about assessment. So assessment kind of follows that same ratio of proportion, right? So we would have a shortened assessment week, but we would have longer days. The proportional amount of time would be significantly, pretty much the same. There's no significant difference. We would still dedicate time for pre and post assessment, benchmark assessments, and state assessments. And then, of course, we have gifted assessments and Azella and everything else that is required by the state. And finally, in speaking with special ed, how might our special education students be impacted? Just think it's important for you to know that our special education minutes are written as monthly total minutes within the IEP. So if you're needing to reach 200 minutes and there's this many days in the month, then you are scheduling, or our resource teachers and our self-contained teachers are scheduling how they are meeting those minutes within the month, having a significant amount of days. They currently use that same model. The minutes per day would be adjusted within the 4-day week to meet the total required IEP minutes. Here is something to keep into consideration, though, as Dr. Schuff might have said earlier, some of our level D outplacement students would still need to be transported on a 5-day schedule by our transportation. So if we have level D students that are attending ACEs, for example, and they are on a 5-day schedule, our transportation is still responsible for transporting those students that need transportation. Okay.
So when it comes back to some of the things we thought about for 7.5 versus 8 hours, we started by thinking about it from a learning perspective for the kids, right? Ultimately, that's got to be our first lens, and we got to keep coming back to that. We looked at the instructional hours. We come fairly close with the 7.5-hour day. We do better than what we're currently doing now with an 8-hour day. So that's one piece. One lens is the student lens. Natasha, at least this initial look at it looks like special education, curriculum, assessment, might be fairly equal, although I have a few qualms about can you do the curriculum in that shorter number of days? That I wonder about that. So that leaves essentially the professional development. Professional development with 7.5 hours modeled the way it is right now, and not pushing more back into the blue days, is less than what we have right now. And you may be thinking, but that's okay. And then so a question would be, is it with a 7.5 versus 8-hour day, going with an 8-hour day really pretty much minimizes that professional development opportunity at all. It kind of came down to maybe 4 hours every other week, maybe, the 6 to 8 once a month with an 8-hour model. So I just want you to have a conversation. I think we're at a time when we keep modeling this at 2 versions, 7.5 and 8, and we continue this path when we start to get into transportation, some of those other things, it's pretty complex. So if you're thinking you're already kind of at the spot where you have a good feel of what you prefer to do, 7.5 or 8. We would like some direction. So when we continue to model this, are we thinking that we want to put to the public and to our board 2 completely different options? Or are we thinking we're down to 1 option to keep modeling for all the rest of this going forward? So will you have a conversation at your table? And I'm just going to be asking you 7.5 or 8, or you could still be saying, hey, I'm really advocating for a different number, and we'll talk everybody else into that number and we'll model it that way going forward. Modeling it 2 ways, I'm seeing no hands. Anybody suggesting we model it something different than 7.5 or 8? You were suggesting?
I think 7, because I'm wondering if that would, I know that we talked about it possibly being a detriment to education for the children, but it would give teachers more time. They could potentially use a few extra minutes before or after to tutor children who may seem to be falling behind. But I also think that we won't necessarily see a detriment if children have proper home support, which I know is not every child. But I don't know that it's going to be as severe as we might think it will.
Okay. I know we're at time. I want you to just briefly talk with one another. I'm going to see if there's support in the room for modeling it at 7 hours. So talk over what she just said. I know that idea came from this table where people were sitting over here last time we met. So just talk about it briefly. We are 7 now.
This gentleman does have something he wants to add, so.
Okay, great.
Not saying how to vote. Just saying.
Okay, I'm hearing you get a little quiet. Raise your hand if you're thinking you'd like to see us continue to pursue modeling it as 7 hour. A few little support for that.
I would be interested to see, because I know our minutes are way over. I'm sorry, I don't have to say that. But I know our minutes are way over, so maybe 7 would work.
Okay. All right. Yes. Which we have now. Right now we have a 7-hour day. We can hardly get anyone to tutor. And then we do have some transportation costs if we do any late buses. I don't know for how many of those we're still doing, but so yes. 7-hour day would be more conducive to the extracurricular, certainly after school hours. Well, we got 7-hour now. If they had some additional flexible time, that's possible. Yep. Okay. Yes.
I disagree with the 7-hour, but I agree with modeling it, because if we're going to see both sides, like, we just need to do all of it. So I agree with you.
You could support seeing that. Well, we haven't shown you what it looks like if you kind of play it out, so that is true. All right. How many of you were thinking to continue to model it and show it at the 8-hour? Does anybody want us to continue to see the 8-hour? Got a couple. Okay. So that means the rest of you were 7.5. Okay, so now we have 7, 7.5, and 8. So give me some direction. So her comment is around OT, PT, some of those related services, having to pull the instructional minutes. Overall, special education was thinking that because we have a longer day, we would still be able to fit in the instructional minutes. Yes?
Last time we talked about late buses, and so a kiddo who, for an 8-hour day, a kinder, say, it would be, 7:30 to 3:30? And then if they have a 30 to 45-minute bus ride home, they're not even leaving home till 4:15 or 4:30, and that's a long day for a 5-year-old. So I think that would be my concern about doing an 8-hour day. And then if you have sports, back to the sports conversation, if you have sports or any clubs and band.
All right, one more, and I think you had a comment too. I want to make sure I get to.
If we're trying to streamline this, do we not just go with the majority?
We can, but sometimes I've been in the room when the entire room thought one thing, and one person presented an idea, and it just kind of gained steam because we just hadn't thought about it. So I just don't want to discount it because we're not majority here. We ultimately would probably go that direction, and it may be that just for a little bit longer we continue to do the back end work of maybe perhaps increasing to 3. I don't know. Maybe I can do it for some of it. I don't know. It's going to start to get a lot more complex when we start to do the schedules of support staff and some of the budgeting pieces that are upcoming. And I think we're going to have to push ourselves to say what is it we're recommending, and it may turn into that. So I just want to leave time in the room.
Thanks. Earlier when you were asking for other considerations for academic and social needs, a lot of these studies have negatives to the 4-day school week, and so I'd want to focus on what we're doing with that 5th day for students. She had mentioned that bullying is increased, crime is increased, sexual activity is increased, the home values in the areas are decreased. It targets low-income families negatively more so. Food insecurity, and it's debatable with the academic performance. But then on the discussion we're on right now, I'd say one of the studies says one of the things you absolutely don't want to do is reduce the amount of instructional time. So that's why I'm going to advocate for 8 hours. I don't think it's as ideal. I have the same concerns as other people with stamina and stuff, but if we're going to talk about cutting down the time, I'm going to say give them as much instruction time as possible, because the little bit of data that we have shows that it's beneficial.
All good thoughts. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry. Do all of the grades have to be at school for the same hours? You know what I mean? Like, can you do a?
So I think I heard you're saying.
You know, like a scaled start and finish time that the younger kids maybe start a little bit younger. You know.
I come from a school district where K2 dismissed 1 hour earlier than 3 through 8. I think that becomes a transportation issue with the number of buses that we have in the fleet at $180,000 a piece, or having sufficient drivers, right? So we will be talking about transportation this next time and some of the implications for the staff itself and some of the costs associated with it. But yes, from a stamina standpoint, if you had an 8-hour day, K2, I'm just using that as an example, they dismiss earlier, that gives those teachers preparation time there. You know, we're rethinking things. We're not going to think every little aspect exactly the way we're doing it right now. We have to be open to that, and that takes time and consideration. So thanks for putting that on the table.
And I have one more question just for clarification. I know that this topic came up when discussion of the bond not being renewed and how to reduce costs, which was brought up by one of the teachers. But as I'm listening to this, is it the case that if it does indeed pass again in November, that this is just going to go away, or are we still going to continue to pursue this as an option?
All right, so I'll reiterate, it surfaced as an idea when we were talking about budget considerations. Anybody that we've talked to, that we've had access to talk to about, does it have any actual budget savings? They'd say, if it did, it's nominal, and it's almost inescapable, difficult to track at best. So we have brought this back just because there was high interest. Regardless of whether there was budget savings, there was an interest from our staff, there was an interest from our community in exploring it. So that's why we're here. So we certainly, again, are not here to try to advance this forward or to keep us rooted in a 5-day schedule. It really is to explore it. So yes, I think it would, I don't think we're doing this to say, how could we save money? We're going to find out when we get to the budget conversation a couple times later coming up, but we don't know just yet. All right, yes. Well, that's kind of what I'm trying to get to, and we'll probably have to push ourselves to that point by, if we don't do it tonight, then by this next time, because it really is time for you all to go. I feel bad I'm keeping you. I think we'll model it. I'll try to put together some of the work we've already done at a 7-hour model, so you can see that, the 7, and then I think we'll push ourselves this next time, because the more options and complexity we give, the less the people are going to be able to actually wrap their heads around it. You are investing hours on this. They're going to get a survey with some information, and they have to understand what's a sample model of that, rather than putting their heads in 3. And maybe that's what we do. Maybe that's what it requires. But our intent, again, is to survey every staff member and every parent, and hopefully they all will participate and do public forums where they can ask questions and respond.
So I'm a teacher here, and I've been at Liberty for over 5 years, and I love Liberty. I don't want to work anywhere else. But if it goes to an 8-hour day, that's at least 9 hours here. I live an hour away.
Yeah.
I would have no work-life balance there. and I'm afraid I would leave.
We will survey them at the same time, all of them, yeah. Will we be talking with staff in between? So all of our staff here, their job is to be going back and having conversations and bringing back, what people think. Your job as parents are to go back, get ideas, share what you're hearing, bring back those questions, those comments. So yes, it'll be back and forth. Our public forums will include both staff and community members or parents able to engage and ask more questions. So we're going to engage as many as we can. So I've kept you. I will stay on for additional questions or comments, but I really want to honor the time that I've already gone over by 15 minutes. Thank you all.